Hi guys, welcome back to the channel, welcome back to the Retro Wrestling Room. We are here with another guest today. The term legend is thrown around a lot these days, but to spend over 60 years in the profession you love is something a very small amount of people get to do. Our guest today has been a wrestler, a commentator and trainer, you name it, he has done it. Our very special guest today is Les Thatcher. Les, thank you so much for joining us today.
Well, it's great to be with you, Benji. I've never been to Wales, but it's good to talk to one of the natives.
Yes.
And always a pleasure to talk about wrestling.
100%.
Isn't it amazing that the equipment gets more sophisticated, which also creates more problems, right?
100%. In July, you're actually celebrating 65 years now in wrestling.
Yes.
That's unbelievable.
I think so too. Yeah, I was 19 years old when I had my first match, and I'll be 85 in October of this year.
That's crazy. So when you started, well, even before you started, when you first started watching wrestling, who were the big names that really stuck out to you at that time?
Well, I first saw wrestling on a little black and white 10-inch screen when I was 9 years old. I didn't even, when my mother, if someone else's home, we didn't even have a TV in our home at the time. We went to a neighbor's, we're going to watch professional wrestling. I didn't know what professional wrestling was at the time. I never, I was basketball, baseball, football, that sort of thing, professional wrestling. So I got my first taste of it and fell in love with it, and have been ever since. Some of the big names back then would have been Don Eagle, Ivan Rasputin, Dr. Ed Mesky, Lucky Simunovich, Mr. Moto, Lord Blears. Once we got a TV in our home, there's a lot of TV now with cable and so forth, right? In the U.S. anyway. But back then, they were simulcast. Don't ask me what that is. I don't know either, but that's what they called it. And so we could see there was wrestling from Dayton, Ohio, and wrestling from Cincinnati on the sister station. There was wrestling from Chicago's Marigold Arena, New York's St. Nicholas Arena, Los Angeles and Hollywood Legion Stadium, and Texas-style wrestling, all in the course of 1 week. This was in the late 40s and early 50s into the mid-50s. So wrestling was a big, big part of television, mainly because the cameras were so bulky and big and heavy. They were on tripods and rollers.
Right.
And so to shoot anything, they needed something that wasn't going to be all over the place. So boxing, wrestling, and back then roller derby were probably the three, things that were easy for TV stations to set up and shoot. So, like I say, wrestling at least 5 times a week if I wanted to watch it.
When you started, it was 1960, right?
Yes.
So would you have started training in 1960 as well?
Yes. February 1960, I got on a Greyhound bus and went to Boston, Massachusetts from my home in Cincinnati and started my training there. And then I had my first match July the 4th of 1960. And today, a lot of the young people who come in to train, obviously, well, they think they're smart to the business. They're actually not, but everyone is smart to our business, right?
Yeah,
because of social media, right? Oh yeah, I know. And I'm a scientist, sure. But anyway, back then, it was a closed shop. I mean, I was frustrated. I decided between two things. I started drag racing. I drove my first race car when I was 15, before I had a driver's license to drive on the highways of the United States. I was on a racetrack.
Right.
So I wanted to either pursue the racing or pursue the wrestling. And so, but it was hard to find someone who would, get my foot in the door. And then in the Wrestling Review there were a lot of wrestling magazines on the newsstands back then at that time. And so Wrestling Review was what monthly that I always bought. So I bought a Wrestling Review. I guess it was in the fall of 1959, and Tony Santos, a promoter in Boston, had an article in there, and he was accepting young men with wanting to have careers in professional wrestling. And I thought, oh my God, here it is. So I wrote him a letter, realizing back then, Benji, that no internet or
Right.
So I wrote him a letter, and a few weeks later, I got a letter back and a trifold. Showed me a picture like of the ring and the gym, and the whole thing. See the world, be a TV star, pro wrestling, blah blah blah. $300 for 6 months training.
All right.
So I still got the trifold in my collection of stuff, right? But anyway, so I made the arrangements and got on a Greyhound bus in Cincinnati, made the 1,000-mile trip to Boston. I'd never lived away from home at that point in time. So I ended up getting into a rooming house and started my training. And a lot of the young guys today that do the camps and stuff that I work with, they'll say, and when they smarten you up? I said, July the 4th, 1960. Well, when I got off that bus in Boston in February of 60, I believed it was a shoot. I mean,
Really?
no amateur background. Well, the crazy thing in Cincinnati at the time, in the public high schools didn't have a wrestling program.
Okay.
And so there were two YMCAs that were relatively close to me. None of them are really close, but the one had a wrestling room with mats, but they had no one teaching. And then the other school, the other YMCA, I should say, they had a sporadic coach. He'd come in sometimes not. So anyway, it was kind of frustrating trying to learn anything. So I got off the bus in Boston without any background at all. And everything I've learned from that point forward has been on the job training, basically, right? So, yeah, so that's and of course, when I tell kids they didn't smart me up until the morning of my first match, how'd you learn? I said the hard way.
Right. On the job. Yeah.
Well, like I say, it was a closed shop, so they wanted to be sure you were going to stick and be there before they were going to smarten you up, right? Okay. Yeah. So the way they actually taught us to work was say you and I are trainees, and unless you and Benji, I want to be sure you guys know the proper way to execute all these holds. So I want you to kind of walk through a match, right? I want you to, now nobody's going to get paid. Nobody's not a winner or a loser. So put holes on each other, reverse holes, but don't apply any pressure.
Right. Okay.
So they were teaching us to work, right, without actually telling us. And still that morning of July the 4th, when they called me over to the promoter, Tony Santos, sent his son, one of his kids, over to the rooming house and said, Dad wants to see you. First, I thought, I'm on the carpet for something because it was 4th of July. We weren't training. I knew, right?
Yeah.
What's he want to see me for at 9 o'clock in the morning?
Right.
So I get there and he says, you have your wrestling boots? Yes, sir. And you've got a jacket and your trunks? Yes. Today's your day. Go home, pack your bag, and we'll talk about this when you come back. So obviously I was nervous. So anyway, when I got back, this is when he started, had me sit down in front of him. He said, you remember how sometimes when they worked with you guys and they told you to put the holes on but not apply the pressure? Yes, sir. I remember that. Okay. Well, that's what you're going to do today. So at that point, I thought, okay, whoever I'm going to wrestle is doing me a big favor. We're going to do it this way to see if I'm good enough to stick or something, right? I didn't know I'd be working that way the rest.
Right.
But yeah, so that's, at Blue Hills, Maine was about, I don't know, 200, 225 miles, whatever, from Boston. And three other wrestlers came by the gym, and I rode up with Joe Sasso, who was a local boy from Boston, had played football at Boston College, and one of the guys who helped me break in, Ronnie Hill, Cowboy Ronnie Hill, and Bull Montana, who I had bought tickets to see in Cincinnati as a kid, right? And he looked mean as a devil too. But anyway, the trip to Blue Hills, Maine, it was we wrestled in a ring out on a racetrack. It was a 4th of July celebration, and so big part of my education that day was the trip to Blue Hills, Maine, with these three veterans, basically filling my head with all, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that.
Yeah.
And then, of course, on the way home, critiquing what I'd done. So
Yeah.
that's the way it started. But those trips with veterans in the cars was a huge part of learning the business, because they weren't extremely caring if you liked the way they told you or didn't like the way they told you, right? But yeah, it was a great part of the education. And so I've been doing that for the rest of I still race now. I was still drag racing.
Really?
In fact, I didn't.
Really?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Oh, wow.
Well,
Oh, wow.
when I didn't do anything in 60, 61, 62. But I moved home. But when I left Boston in 61, went back to Cincinnati. I started working for Jim Barnett out of the Indianapolis office to begin with. But so for the first few years, I'd go out to other territories, but come back in. And what I tried to do, so my dad and I could continue to drag race, was try to be in Ohio, home base in the early spring, and wrestle for like the Bruiser out of Indianapolis at that time. Barnett had gone on to Australia, and the Sheik, who promoted Detroit, the Detroit area. And so sometimes I could wrestle away from home on Saturday night, get back to my home maybe 3 o'clock in the morning, get 3 or 4 hours sleep. My dad had the race car loaded up. We were ready to go. I'd crawl up in the back of the race car and sleep some more till we got to the track, and then we would drive. But but then, well, if we'd have got big sponsor and could have moved up to a higher class where we could have actually made a living at it, I might have stuck with that. But as it were, finally I decided in 1966, okay, wrestling is what it's going to be, and here we go. So then but I still love I still love watching racing on television, and it's still a big part of my life. But yeah, that's the way it went.
You mentioned Ron Hill was in that car on that very first trip. He was your first match, right?
Right?
Yes.
How did that first match go for you?
You know what? I don't remember a lot. Apparently, okay. Was I nervous? Yeah, I sure was. I had 2 matches that day. See, because back then, 4 wrestlers, we had 3 matches. Ronnie Hill and I had the first match. Joe Sasso and Bull worked the second match. Then there was an intermission. Then Joe and I came back in a tag against Bull and Ronnie. Right. And a lot of spot shows back in those days were run like that, with like just 4 guys. And when you tell a young guy today that we had a 2.5-hour show with 4 wrestlers and 3 matches, they look at you like you must be nuts.
Yeah.
How did that work? Well, it worked because we knew how to work.
Right.
And you learn immediately that and listen to the veterans, obviously. So it's I'll tell you, it's been a great run. I still love it. It's still, you find me something that I can pay my bills full time in the business today, I'm there. Right. is what I want to do.
I was I was going to bring it up later in the podcast, Les, but I'll bring it up now because you mentioned that and you were laughing and smiling when you said that last sentence. A lot of veterans in the business get a bit of a bad name because the stigma is that they become old and bitter with the business. Every interview I have ever seen with you has been the most positive interview I've ever seen, and you just seem to still have so much enthusiasm for the wrestling business. There doesn't ever seem to be any negativity that you throw out in these podcasts.
No, well, have there been negative things happen? Of course, but yeah, it's well, it's a certain time you see certain things. There's politics in the business, right? Right. You learn at some point. If you were a football player or soccer or basketball or baseball, if you play those games at a professional level, you will make a living and get to be a professional. But in our business, it's all subjective. The toughest guys don't always get the best bookings. The weakest guys who maybe are better entertainers or have a better look or something, they may get the better bookings. So, there are politics that play in it, but you'll learn to adjust to that, right? And for us back then, I don't know how, there was no hazing or anything like that, right? And you're right. I've tried to be well, and I've heard this talk. Oh, I know those veterans kicked your ass, right? Or they, they stretched you. No, I never had a problem. But then no one had to tell me you need to respect these guys who came before you, or that they, And I was smart enough to know the difference between the young kid from Cincinnati and that grizzled-looking guy who could whip my ass over there in about 3 minutes is all it would take him, right? So, yeah. Well, so it's... The crazy thing is, Benji, I guess I've been living my dream all my adult life. I mean, I'm not in the wrestling business full-time now, but, I still do seminars and camps. I have a podcast here in the States once a week. So yeah, it's still my life, and I love it. And you learn the veterans to me were, it was a learning experience. The second year I was in Boston, I had gone home in Christmas of 1960 to be with my family. So I took my car back to Boston with me instead of riding the bus. And Tony Santos, the guys didn't pay their own trance back then, or not in that territory. They did in other territories. But the promoter, if you rode 2 guys or 3 guys in your car, then he paid their trance, so you picked up extra money. So that was one of the ways, of picking up extra bucks, driving the guys around. Plus, I had a decent car, so like Pat O'Connor came in for a week in the territory, and Don Fargo and Eric Pedersen did the same, and Pompero Firpo the same. So I Argentina Rockeye. So I drove these guys around and was able to pick their brain, and talk to them about it, about the business and everything. So it was a great learning experience. And every new territory is like going to a different school, right? Because the style's a little different in that one part of the country than it was in another. And so, yeah, it's the shame that the kids can't get that kind of education today, and because that's the best, believe me, being out on the road working every night. And that's the other thing, they don't have to work now 6 nights a week, and they should, but they don't have to.
Do you think you learn more? I know it's a hard question, really. Probably both, but do you think you learn more in the ring or in those car journeys with those veterans?
Oh wow, probably a little of both.
Yeah.
Yeah, because Well, and how do you work your way up? Back then, there were no guaranteed contracts, right?
Right. Yeah.
If I'm going to a new territory and you're the promoter, I'm going to say, well, Benji, I need some sort of guarantee. Well, you're going to offer me a minimum per night or a minimum per week and hope that I make more than that, right? And it was all on the handshake or word of mouth, right? There was no 15 pages of contracts to sign and all that stuff. And if I didn't like the way you were using me in your territory, once I had a reputation and had places I could go, it was just a matter of picking up the phone and calling hey, I'm looking to make a move. Do you need a baby face? Whatever. And then if you hooked up, you went in and depending on where you were at in the card, if I were just one of the preliminary wrestlers, I could give you 2 weeks notice and leave. If I'm being featured, I want maybe a month or 6 weeks, depending, so I can put some guys over on my way out of the territory, right? So, but that education was so invaluable. I mean, it's a shame that the kids can't get that today. When I had my school, one of the things that we had 4 organized training sessions a week, and I was emphatic that you be in 3 of those 4 every week if you want to actually get out of here. Right. Because the only way to learn this business is repetition. And of course, for us, you start out maybe going 3 nights a week, and then finally, as you get experience and start moving around, you're going 5, 6 nights a week. So it's hard not to learn. And you're working with veterans every night, guys who are better than you or have been around, and so it's the atmosphere is just great. And territories are a whole different thing. Today there's a camaraderie today, but I don't believe it is the same, because back then, if you're a heel and I'm a baby face, I'm still covering your back, right? If something breaks out in the if the audience decides they want a piece of your butt, then I'm gonna try to be sure that they don't get it, right? And so it was, and again, it was a closed shop, right? The only guys I could talk about, like the way I'm talking to you now, was other people in the business. Yeah. I couldn't talk to my neighbors or the guys I grew up with, my best friends since grade school. I couldn't tell them,
It was almost like a double life, I guess. Everybody had to leave, wasn't it?
Yeah. It really, well, this is jumping way forward, but when my daughter was about 4 years old, about 4 years old, I was wrestling out of the Nashville territory, and we were in Lexington, Kentucky, which is just like 80 miles from my hometown of Cincinnati. So my mother and father decided to bring my daughter and come to the matches. And so, as it were, that I was working an angle with, you wouldn't know who the heel was. His name was Mac York, but he is Ricky Morton's uncle.
Right, okay.
Yeah. So anyway, Mac was a hell of a work. We were working a return to come back to Lexington on the next show, he and I, so I got blood. And my daughter freaked out. My dad took her out at the auditorium, right, to calm her down and everything. So the first chance my dad got to talk to me, he said, "You need to tell her." I said, No, you're not going to tell her, and I'm not going to tell her. No, that's not the way it goes. Because let's face it, a kid, what's the greatest thing in the world? If I'm 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 years old, and I got a secret, I want to tell somebody that secret.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, but that's the way it was, and but yeah, it's been just a wonderful time, Benj. It's like I say, I guess at the age 84, I'm still living my dream in part, because I still am involved in the business, And like I say, if you have something for me to do full time that I can pay my bills, I'd rather be doing that than anything else. Yeah. Take my word for it.
Well, I guess your daughter when she was growing up, it was kind of handy that you were 90% of your career a good guy. Because that must have been awful for the kids who, if they say their dad was a heel on TV, trying to explain that to all their friends.
Yeah, I only worked heel about 6 weeks and that was in Eastern Canada in 1970. And of course, in 1970, yeah, if you were an American of draft age and you were in Canada, they figured you were a draft dodger, right?
Right. Okay.
So they made me a heel whether I wanted to be a heel or not. But the whole idea, that's where I started my broadcasting career, was with Rudy Kay in Eastern Canada in 1970, by accident, actually. Rudy had lived next door to me in the Carolinas when we were both wrestling there in 1967, 68. And he was my next door neighbor. We traveled a lot together. And, you talk about God knows everything to kill time on the road. And one of the things that I had said to him was, once I met Gordon Solie in Florida in 1967, I thought, this guy does wrestling so much different than anyone else, and realized back then most of the people doing commentary on wrestling actually weren't anything to do with wrestling, or weren't really that much into it. They were local broadcasters on that particular TV station, maybe had a kiddie show or a talk show or something. And so the promoter had paid this guy $25 or $50 to do the show once a week. And that local guy was more intent on getting his product over than he was the wrestlers anyway, right? So it was, so. But with Gordon Solie, it's like, damn, he's calling us like a shoot. And Gordon and I became friends not only because of wrestling, because of racing as well, because he was into stock car racing. He owned part of Golden Gate Speedway in St. Petersburg, Florida. So we hit it off with the racing end of it too, right? So so anyway, in Canada, I didn't go up there with any clue that I would end up on a microphone, broadcasting a wrestling show. Rudy called me. Our schedule started. We started in Moncton, where we lived, on Monday. Then we went to Halifax Tuesday, stayed over, and did our TV in Halifax on Wednesday morning. So he called me one Monday before the show that evening in Moncton, and we were just shooting the breeze. And he said, "Remember when we were running up and down the roads in Charlotte? You said you'd like to try broadcast, doing a play-by-play." And I said, "Yeah." He said, "Well, bring a sport coat and a tie to Halifax, because you're going to do." I said, "Excuse me?" Now, all Rudy and his brothers, the Cormiers, their real name, they're all great ribbers, right? So my first thought is, okay, you're setting me up here, right? You're going to have me come with a coat and tie and everything and walk into the TV station. They're going to say, "We got you," right? "You went for it and we got you." He finally committed. No, he said, "This is..." The guy who was doing his broadcasting at the time was originally from Toronto and had a death in the family, so he had to go back to Toronto. So that was how I got involved in broadcasting. And that Wednesday morning in Halifax, I'd been interviewed on television, but I never cued in and out of a segment, right? Never introduced a show. And so I went in cold, and there were no co-hosts back then. It was just you and the microphone. So that's how it started for me. And the idea was I was going to do a few weeks until the guy came back from Toronto. And so Rudy called me like about the third week, and he said, "Listen, you're doing a good job. I'll make sure to you get extra money for doing the television along with wrestling, and you finish out the season." So that's how I got started in broadcasting. Finished out the season in doing the Maritimes wrestling show.
Because you actually did the commentary with, you mentioned Gordon Solie, Jim Ross, Lance Russell as well.
Bob Cottle. Yeah, well,
they're some big announcers.
Yeah, I said that's the Mount Rushmore of broadcasters.
Yeah.
And they said, how hard were they to work with? They weren't. I mean, it's funny. I fell into it, and it it went well. That's all. It went well. I'll tell you how easy. Uh, when Cornette had Smoky Mountain, that's where Ross and I first worked together. We had met. We didn't know each other real well. But have you seen the Night of Champions?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. That's the first show Jim and I ever did together.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so at the intermission, we went to the back to get a drink and go to the bathroom and so forth. And Terry Funk came up to me while we were back there, and he said, "Hey, I've been watching the monitor." He said, "You and JR are calling wrestling the way it should be called." He said, "How long have you guys worked together?" I looked at I said, "About an hour and a half." He said, "Oh, bullshit." I said, "No, we've been working together an hour. That's it, you know."
Yeah.
But with just, well, and Gordon, it was, and then in 1973, I got a chance to go to Atlanta and work with Gordon. And yeah, so it was just, but you know what? When I look back at learning to wrestle, realize some of the greatest workers of anybody's generation were guys from their era, right? The 50s, 60s, and into the 70s. So the people I wrestled, you know, if I didn't, I had to have been a complete idiot if I didn't learn, right?
Right.
First television show I was ever on myself. I left Boston in 61, went home, and you know, needed to hook up with somebody. So Barnett was promoting all around, based out of Indianapolis, but was promoting Ohio, Michigan, West Virginia, Kentucky, and so forth. So I saw that Emile Dupre, who is from the Maritimes, was going to be on one of the shows in Cincinnati. And I had met Emile actually in Boston. He had come in and worked some spots for Santos. So I went and got a hold of him at the Garden, Cincinnati Gardens, and he gave me Les Ruffin's name and the phone number at the Indianapolis office. And he said, send him pictures and contact him and tell him I told you. So my phone rings at home in Cincinnati, and it's Les Ruffin. And first thing he says, "How old are you?" And I said, 21. You got proof? Because I look so much younger than that. I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, we want to give you a try. Can you be at Indianapolis Television Saturday morning?" I said, "Yes, sir, I'll be there." So I go to Indianapolis. I had never been on a TV show at this point in time. I'd never wrestled on a TV show. But I walk in the dressing room at Indianapolis TV station, and there sits Fritz von Erich, Dick the Bruiser, Eddie Farhat, the original Sheik, Angelo Poffo, Randy Savage's dad, Joe Blanchard, Tully's dad, and Tessa's grandfather. And I bought tickets to watch all these people, right? I thought, do I belong here or not, you know? And so, and sometimes if I tell this story, somebody says, "What'd you say?" I said, "Absolutely nothing." I went and sat down, and until someone spoke to me, I didn't say a word, right? But then I got to work with all those guys, and that was a great thing too, because everybody's, unless you're 7 feet tall or 5,000 pounds or something, back then that you started looking at the lights every night until, you know, you worked your way up. You earned a reputation. You paid your dues, you know. And part of that was protecting the veterans that you're working with and getting them over the way they need to be got over. And Lance Storm and I had a conversation about this one time, and he was telling me about this happening with somebody. But we were in Detroit TV, and Mark Lewin had been out with illness, some kind, virus I think it was, and still wasn't 100%, but he was going to be on TV that night. So he came in, and Johnny Doyle, who was the promoter in Detroit, Barnett's partner, and he said, "How you doing, Mark?" And Mark said, "I could be better, but I'm ready to work." And he said, "Who am I working with?" And to this day, I do not remember who it was supposed to be. But he just kind of scrunched his nose up and shook his head. And he looked around. And he said, "Let me work with Thatcher." And I couldn't have had a better, comment made, because what he was saying is, let me work with him because he's going to put me over. He's going to get me over well, and he's going to protect me because he knows I'm sick. And that's, but Cornette makes the comment that, back in the day, there's a lot of badasses who never hurt anybody. Today, there's a lot of guys that aren't badasses and hurt each other all the damn time, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I worked, first time I worked with Harley Race, I was 22 and he was 19.
Yeah, 63. Well, I was going to say, because you mentioned earlier, it was about 60, was it 66 you decided, right, this is definitely for me now, I'm going to stick with just wrestling. Was it around that time? Right. So 66. So this is 3 years before you're 100% in. So 63 to face a 19-year-old Harley Race.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I think, too, is having confidence in yourself. Now, a lot of young guys, there's always going to, and I had it one time, like, why am I not doing better? Why am I not getting, well, I know, I can look back and tell you exactly why I wasn't doing better, why I wasn't getting a push. I hadn't earned it. That was the biggest answer. But today, the young guys are a lot more cheeky and, a lot more, not nearly cautious enough about what they say sometimes, right? But yeah, you've got to earn your spot. But where it started for me, I think to lock it in, is I had been in Phoenix, Arizona for a while in the summers of '66, came home back to Cincinnati, and Roger Kirby was in Georgia, Atlanta. And we wrote letters back and forth to each other at this time. And so he said, "It's territory's good. Would you think about coming down here?" And I said, "Yeah, if you can hook me up, great." So my phone rings, and it's Roger, and he's in Leo Garibaldi's office. Leo was the booker, and I had seen Leo he and his dad were a big tag team on the California TV. Leo and Gino Garibaldi, and Leo was the red hot young guy at the time. So anyway, he was the booker in Atlanta. So he got on the phone. He said, "Roger and Dennis say you know how to work. Is that a fact?" And I said, "Well, I hope so." Yeah. So he gave me a starting date, and so went in, and we can talk about that territory a little bit too. But the main thing was that while I was there, he loaned us out to the Mobile territory, and they happened to be in the market for a couple good baby faces to go into Louisiana at that time, right? And so they mentioned it to Roger and I. Roger said, "You want to go?" I said, "Well, we can do that." So that's how the Wrestling Cousins thing started. Roger Kirby and Dennis Hall were both from Indiana, and we got to be friends when we were all working together for Barnett and for the Sheik later on in Detroit as well. And so we come up with this idea of the Wrestling Cousins thing, right? And so Kirby and I went into the Louisiana territory for Lee Fields, who owned both the Mobile territory and the Louisiana territory, with the idea that Dennis is going to come in to do six-mans. We were kind of doing the Freebird thing before the Freebirds,
right,
but nobody, like the three of us.
Yeah.
So the Daltons, Donnie Fargo and Frank Dalton were the big heels there. So Kirby and I start a feud with them, and it goes on, and then it was supposed to be another wrestler named Johnny Long was wrestling as Bob Dalton, but for some reason he had to leave the territory. And so, but when Dennis came in, we're going to do six-mans. So Bull Ramos was put with the Daltons to do that. And so, but we're down in Mobile. We moved down there from Louisiana. and we're going to Dothan, Alabama. They're having a tag team tournament. And Eddie Graham and Sam Steamboat come in from Tampa to wrestle as a team. And Lester Welch came in as well, and they teamed me with Lester. Lester was one of the bookers in Tampa. I guess because we both had the first name were alike, because I'd never met him. So anyway, we worked a Friday night in Dothan, and there was a spot show on Saturday night, and Eddie and Sam and Lester was there as well. So in the midst of the show Saturday night, Eddie and Lester come to me and say, we've talked to Rocky McGuire, who was the booker in Mobile, and he said, we want you to come to Tampa because you're going to be the NWA Rookie of the Year. Hmm. I said, who, me? And so that's one of the reasons I said, okay, this is it. This is full time.
Right. Okay.
But the crazy thing was, when we went to Mobile from Louisiana, I got to tell you this part. We're talking about, I mentioned earlier how I looked younger than my years, right? So we get to Mobile, and Rocky McGuire pulls me aside, and he said, Bobby Shane was in Atlanta at the time. He was a teenage sensation, 17-year-old teenage sensation. Leo Garibaldi was a booker still, and Leo was pushing him over. Rocky said, I want Kirby and Hall to work as a team. You're going to be my 17-year-old teenage sensation. Wait a minute. I'm 26 years old, right? I thought, are you nuts or what? So, but you know what? The people bought it. I looked young enough that they, of course, ruined my social life, because when Kirby and Hall were going to have a beer after a match,
of course,
17 years old, I can't go to the bar, right? So that was going on Mobile. So anyway, so I went to Tampa as a rookie, NWA Rookie of the Year in 1967. And the whole deal down there was to work with Hiro Matsuda. Had dropped the NWA Junior Heavyweight title back to Danny Hodge. And so the deal was, if I could get by Matsuda, I got a shot with Hodge for the junior title. And then, of course, Matsuda teamed up with Ronnie Garvin, so I needed one of my cousins, and Kirby came in, and we worked a bunch of deals there and everything. But that's how it got to be full time. When I thought, okay, we can do this, and so that's the way it went.
In the 70s, you had the NWA Tennessee tag team titles, and you had two different partners, Royal and Caldwell. What were the differences between the two teams, would you say?
Well, just Nelson was one of the greatest ring generals I have ever worked with. I mean, he could call a match without thinking about it, right? And of course, back then, you realize if I'm going 60 minutes with somebody back then, all we knew was the finish, the last 2 minutes of that 60, right? And everything else was improv. And I wish it still were, because I get so tired of watching these paint by number things. And the worst part about it, I think now, is when I had HWA, if you came to train with me, and when you left, you knew how to call a match on the fly, like I was just talking about. Because the main thing is, humans have frailties. Humans make mistakes. So my point to the younger generation now, if somebody is paying you good money to lay it all out in the back, then do that, because it's a job, it's a business, right? But you still should know how to call a match on the fly, because let's say you and I are having a match today, and the finish is supposed to be you're going to the top rope at the end and do some elaborate quadruple somersault or something, to beat me, okay? And we're going to go like 25 minutes. 10 minutes in, you pulled a hamstring. Not bad enough that we can't continue the match, but you're sure as hell not going to the top rope.
Right.
We better be able to change that finish, right?
Yeah.
We can't say, excuse us, ladies and gentlemen, we need time out to go back to the dressing room and talk another 45 minutes to get a finish. And I'll tell you a story that I tell kids about that, about calling things on the fly. I moved back to Atlanta for a moment. The first night that Kirby and I worked tag team in the old Atlanta auditorium on Friday night, of course, you realize back then too, you weren't in the dressing room with your opponents. So anyway, Leo referee.
I never even thought of things like that.
Yeah. So anyway, Leo comes to us and he said to me, basically, he said, "Look," he said, "I need to get these guys over. They're going to be my top heels here for a long time." And he said, "I don't want you to think I'm just going to start beating you right off the bat, but I need to get them over tonight." And he gave us the finish. And like I say, Leo refereed some, and he was going to referee our match that night. Now, the team that we were working with, I had never met, never heard of. Now, Kirby had been there. I don't know if he ever worked with him or not. But anyway, Leo refereed our match. So we go out there, and it's one of those nights you couldn't have made a mistake if you tried. We had that old auditorium just rocking, you know. I mean, we had heat. They're great heels. We were selling their, and the match is going wonderful. Leo's the referee, and he comes around and he said, "We're not wasting this. We're bringing it back. Here's the new finish." In the middle of the match, he gave us a new finish. And you know what we did? We did the finish and got the match over and came back the next week. And I look at the kids, could you do that today? Of course they couldn't. Not if they don't know how to call a match on the fly. But the two guys that we were working with that we needed to get over were Lars and Gene Anderson. It was just the start of the Anderson brothers dynasty in that part of the world. Yeah.
I guess like when I'm reading back on wrestling, you have people like, well, somebody who I'm going to mention in a moment, Ric Flair, who was adamant he always wanted to call it in the ring. And then you had, say, a Randy Savage who wanted every detail planned out beforehand. But like you said, maybe the new generation can't call it in the ring or don't have that ability to. Randy Savage would have had that ability to. He just didn't particularly like it.
Well, you know what, though? When you talk to Ricky Steamboat about that match and then ask him, would you rather work with Flair or would you rather work with Randy? Flair. It didn't stop. Randy was good, but he drove Ricky nuts. Every night they were in a hotel, come, remember 42, remember 43. What? Yeah. I would, if you held a gun to my head and said, I want you to memorize a 10-minute match, I said, shoot me, please, just go on, because no, nor do I want to. Right. Because, here's the crazy thing, Benji, you and I could have a match, say here in Knoxville, Tennessee, where I'm living now, and we tear the roof off the place maybe. We take that same match 175 miles to the west in Nashville, Tennessee tomorrow night. Those people may sit on their hands. They may not like what we're doing. So we better know how to shift gears and give them something they're willing to buy, right?
Right. Yeah. You mentioned... Oh, go on.
And you can't know that until you get out there. That's one of the things. I have a sarcastic sense of humor, and working with young guys, like in these, getting ready to do one of these weekend training camps, and we're doing a Friday night Q&A. I'll say, how many of you guys here have living girlfriends or are married? Hands go up. Okay, I got some homework for you. When you go home tonight, tell your wife, honey, when we get in bed, we're going to make love. And now, when I go to stroke your thigh, you moan and you do this. And what you now you're cracking. But see, and then some of these kids, they'll be trying to cover up like, oh. I said, no, it's all right, laugh. I meant it to be funny, but I'm also making a point. You know that woman intimately. You know her likes and dislikes, favorite color, and all that, right? Yet you would never do that. Basically because she'd throw your ass out of the bedroom, probably, if you tried. But my point is that Saturday night you're going to a town where you've never met a soul and lay out a match in the dressing room for people you've never seen before in your life. How can you do that? You can't. You can and you will, but it doesn't make any sense to me to do that.
You mentioned Ric Flair. You faced him a few times in the 70s. Would that have been pre his back injury or post his injury?
No, he had just come out of Minneapolis. He had only been in the business about a year at that time. This was when George Scott had taken over the booking in the Carolinas. And so he was bringing in some fresh talent, you know. And so, again, the first time I wrestled, I guess I had probably Ric's third match in the Carolinas with.
Oh, wow, was that early?
Yeah, and it was like we were in Richmond, Virginia, at the old Fairgrounds Coliseum there. And again, you're not in the same dressing room. And the promoter came in and said, "You're working with the new kid from Minneapolis." And I said, "Oh, Christ, one of Vern's shooters. God, it's going to be stiff, I'm sure." But so he said, "What do you want to do?" And I told him. So anyway, Ric and I met for the first time in the middle of the ring when the referee called us out for instructions. And he said, "You're going to call the match?" I said, "Yeah." And we had a match, and it was, you know, it was good. And a little bit after that match, I probably made the most gross understatement I've ever made in my life when I went back to the babyface dressing room, and the guy said, "How was the new kid?" I said, "I think he's going to be all right." I guess he was all right.
Yeah, I think he did all right. Yeah, because he had his supposedly last match a couple of years ago. Wasn't particularly happy with it, so he said,
You know what? That was in Nashville, just 175 miles from here, right straight down I-40 west, right? I was. "You're not going?" I said, "No, I don't want to. I don't want to see him in the ring."
No.
But someone put the video up, and I saw the end, and I thought, I felt so bad, so bad.
Yeah.
I don't want to see him go out that way. Well, but you know what? That's the other thing too. A lot of guys who are top drawer performers in the 70s and 80s are still lacing them up, and I wish they weren't. And I say that not because I don't like those guys, but because I do respect them, and I saw them when they were at the top of their game, and they're not there now. And I don't want, you know, because I've heard some young people with some of the older guys say, "Oh my God, he's what, you know, how bad is he?" and this and that. I don't want to hear that.
No, I feel exactly the same way. There was that Heroes of Wrestling show in '99, and you know, even to this day, you'll see YouTube reviews go up about it, and they're mocking all these wrestlers. And then, but if you watch them from 10, 15 years before, it's like different people, you know. But people, say my age, won't remember that, and it's really sad in a way.
Oh, you know what? I just hadn't thought about it, but the yellow poster up behind me. Did you notice Pat Patterson wrestled a guy named Les Milady? That's me.
Oh, okay.
Milady is my real last name.
Oh, right. Okay. No, I didn't know this.
It's Irish. So when I was in Boston, and everybody mispronounces it, right? Malady, you know, and I'm used to that. But and of course in Boston, there's a lot of Irish in the surrounding areas. So nobody ever thought about changing my last name, and so I didn't either. So when I went to work for Barnett, I used, you know, Milady initially, and so Les Ruffin. I'd been wrestling for Barnett maybe 6 weeks maybe at the time, and Les came into one of the dressing room one night and he said, "The old man," that's meaning Jim, Mr. Barnett, He's tired of hearing people butcher your last name. He wants to call you Les Thatcher. Is that okay? And I thought, hell, I don't care what you call me. Let me wrestle, right? I was just getting my career started. Call me anything you want. So I've been Les Thatcher ever since.
Going off subject slightly, is it true that you and the Briscoes were the first people to kind of like produce and market wrestling t-shirts?
Yes.
Wow. So what year would that have been?
I had the idea, t-shirts first started like in the 60s, right?
Yeah.
And bands, and then, everybody's getting a t-shirt with a logo, and baseball players and so forth. And I'm thinking, well, babyface wrestlers can do this too, right? And I had mentioned it to a couple promoters. And they didn't say it was a bad idea. They just weren't interested in doing it, right? Oh, no, that's, okay. We sell in wrestling, right? Okay. So Jack and Jerry and I were sitting in Jerry's apartment in Charlotte and having a few cold ones and just talking in general. I mean, we're not necessarily about wrestling or anything. And I mentioned to them, I said, this is frustrating to me, but I think it's a good idea. And I told them, what my idea was. And Jack says, well, why don't we do it? I said, us? He said, yeah, why don't we do it? He said, we'll each put in a third, and we put out a Briscoe Booster T-shirt. And this young man just making his name in the business was a good artist by the name of Jerry Lawler. Right. And we asked him to do the pen and ink drawing, and he did for the absorbent amount of $25. I wish I had that artwork now, probably worth $120.
Wow, yeah.
Have you ever seen the shirts?
I don't know. No, I'm trying to think what it is.
I'm going to disappear in a minute. I'll be right back.
Okay, yeah, of course.
I've got a picture of it.
Oh, brilliant. Yeah, that'd be amazing. I have seen that photo. Right, okay. Yeah, I do know that one.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
But yeah, Lawler did that photo. Did that drawing. And so Jerry and I, and the crazy thing was the first night we had the shirts, we took them to Fayetteville, North Carolina. And I teased him too. I said, I think we started gimmick tables as well because, back then, all wrestlers sold was we'd have glossy 8x10 black and white photos, right? $1 a piece. We sold them for $1 a piece, right? And that's, you didn't need a table for those. You'd find some lady or kid that come to the matches all the time and they'd sell, and you give them a couple bucks for handling the stuff for you. So Jerry and I have got all these boxes of T-shirts. Where the hell So we asked one of the people that worked for the Coliseum there in Fayetteville, could we have a table? So we put these up. And man, we sold a bunch of those things that night. Business got pretty good. And now, again, we were not entrepreneurs. So we didn't have that big a profit margin built into the shirts. So some of the Coliseums that got a big percentage, what you sold, we didn't even bother to go to. But the crazy thing was, excuse me, I was doing a program for the Atlanta office while I was doing a program for the Charlotte office as well. This is when I went down to Atlanta to work with Gordon. I had to get a 2-bedroom apartment. One bedroom was for the T-shirts, and the other bedroom was for me. And I said, this is not going to fly. So anyway, once they saw that we were selling shirts, guess what? The promoters thought it was a good idea. They wanted a piece of the action too. So we just, we sold them out. And my dad, who could build anything or fix anything, he built some shelving out in our garage in Cincinnati. And I took the T-shirts there, and him and my mother finished the sales off for us. Mail order, right? So we sold a mail order, yeah. But yeah, 1972, first wrestling T-shirts ever.
Wow. You became a trainer later on then, and you just look at some of the names that maybe you didn't start with them from scratch, but you've had a big helping hand in people, that everybody knows if they're watching wrestling nowadays. Adam Cole, Callahan, Moxley, Nigel McGuinness, who made a comeback.
L.A. Knight.
LA Knight.
Yeah, Charlie Haas, Umaga, Rosie, Jamie Noble.
It's just a
PJ
list of who's
Whitmer,
who.
Shark Boy.
Yeah.
Well, you know, I mentioned that so many things I've done in the business came by accident, right? The magazine thing came by accident. That happened by accident. The broadcasting by accident. And being a trainer was, I was doing cornets. I was living back in Cincinnati at the time and coming down here to do Smoky Mountain TV for Jimmy. And I was also training bodybuilders. I was doing competitive bodybuilding at the time. And so now J.J. Dillon, Terry Taylor, Scott Casey all say that I was helped them when, but that was, and I did, I guess, but I never thought of myself as a trainer, right? And so anyway, Bob Harmon, the original Beautiful Bobby, is a Cincinnati boy as well. So he called me one day and was telling me about a guy that had a wrestling school in Cincinnati. I didn't even know there was such a thing in Cincinnati. And he said he's got a dumbass as a trainer. And he said he needs to get somebody that knows what they're doing, otherwise he's going to lose the kids he's got. And I said, well, I feel bad for the guy. Why are you telling me this? He said, well, you're the guy that's going to be the trainer. I said, you're out of your friggin' mind. I was training bodybuilders at the time, right? And competing myself. And so he finds it, they have a show on Saturday night on the west side of the city. He said, do me a favor, come go to that show with me and we'll talk about it. I said, okay, I'll go to the show with you. So we went, it's the first independent show I'd ever been to. To tell you I was horrified would have been a mild statement, but I was. So anyway, during this show, now Bob's sitting next to me, and the guy that owns the school is sitting on the other side of him. And I'm watching these two kids in the ring, and the one guy goes out and gets a chair. And I can tell by the way he's holding a chair, he has no idea what to do with it in terms of hitting somebody. And sure enough, he hauled off and hit his opponent and rung the guy's bell a little bit, enough. The guy didn't go down, but he's like wandering around in circles. He was a bit dazed, and they had to go out and get him out of the ring. And I'm thinking, that kid should have never picked a chair up. And so I leaned over to Bob and I said, find out how long this guy's been training. So Bob leans over to the guy that owns the school, and he comes back to me and he said, he's been to 4 practices. I just threw my hands up. I said, no, he's got no business being in the ring to start with. Never mind using a chair. So that's what made me, okay, I'll try this. See what happens. And here we are. So,
who do you think the people that you've trained were, say, the big... I guess it's a bit harsh to say the biggest surprise, because that gives a negative connotation to how they started. But who did surprise you the most that they got so far in wrestling, when, say, from that first training session that they had?
Well, you know what, Nigel, a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, not because he, people say, how did he? I said he worked his ass off. He couldn't get a green card initially, so he could only come to the States for 6 months. So he had to go back to England twice before he finished his training with me, right? But when he went back to, like the one time when he went back, he was working double shifts at some restaurant, sleeping on a buddy of his kitchen floor on a mattress, right, to save money, so he'd come back to the States. But I've never known anyone to work any harder than Nigel Mcguinness to get what he wanted. And I'm so proud. I mean, he's one of my kids. I call them all my kids, right? They're old. And you can't be that old. That's not right. That means I'm old too. But yeah, Nigel, one of the very best. And when I saw him wrestle with Brian on AEW, I said, yes, I love it. Best wrestling match that company's had. Period. End of story.
It's one of the greatest comeback stories ever. It's just such a feel good story because, you know, Nigel Mcguinness, when he was in Ring of Honor, he was one of my favourites, you know, obviously being from the UK as well. And I just loved his style. And then I think it was that documentary that he funded himself. Well, I think he even edited himself, the last McGuinness DVD. It was, it's just so tragic.
He produced that damn thing himself.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
He's a talented guy.
But seeing how he went through that, and then, because I was actually at the Wembley show when he made his big comeback, and to see that crowd, you know, instantly know his theme music as well. Once we saw him come out, it was an unbelievable feeling. I can't imagine what it was like for him.
Oh, I didn't get to see that. I didn't see the Wembley Stadium. I saw some outtakes, but I knew I wasn't going to miss the match with him and Brian with the Dragon, and they beat the hell out of each other years ago. Well, the one match they had in England, Nigel bounced his friggin' head off a ring post, and I said, "Are you out of your friggin' mind?" Oh no, I just got caught up in the show, right? I said, "Well, have you been to a no?" I said, that was the size of a softball. My God, you know, I was so afraid that, you know, it's something bad. But yeah, those two guys are magic together. They really are. They are magic together. You've seen Shark Boy, right?
Yeah.
Dean was one of the first people that signed up at HWA, and he actually came to be a referee because back when he started, there were no cruiserweights per se, right? There was no classification for cruiserweights. The mask thing came by accident. One of the guys that was training with me, his high school, for their senior prom night, you know, they have things going on at the school, so the kids, you know, won't go out and get drunk and crazy, and they'll come back to the school and do things after the prom. So they contacted this kid and said, well, could you guys have a wrestling show at the school? So, you know, there was no big budget. And of course, the guys, you know, with the matches were guys still training with me. So I told Dean, I said, instead of refereeing, I said, I need another wrestler. And of course, my referees train just like my wrestlers train because they're going to have to take bumps at some point anyway.
Right.
So I told Dean, I said, borrow a mask from somebody. Because he was my steady and only referee at that particular time. I said, I don't want people knowing my referee also wrestles. It's just an old school thing, right? And so he borrowed a mask, and I said, what do you want me to call him? I said, I don't care. So he came up with Piranha or something like that, right? And then Ian Rotten, he had gone down to work some for Ian. Ian's the one that came up with the Shark Boy idea. But damn it, he made it work. And you know, he caught on before he got to WCW and all. He was making $100, $125 going to birthday parties for kids in the Shark outfit and stuff, right? And the kids got into it so good. I had one Saturday, I was just getting ready to leave to go to one of our shows. The phone rang at the office, and I answered it, and the lady said, do you know the card tonight in Hamilton? And I said, yes, ma'am. Could you tell me what match Shark Boy's on? And I said, yes, let me look at the card here. And I said, yeah, whatever it was, I think maybe fourth or fifth. And she said, well, thank you. I said, excuse me, ma'am, could I ask you a question? She said, certainly. I said, why is it important what match Shark Boy is on? She says, because the only reason our little boy goes is to see Shark Boy, and when his match is over, our son's ready to go home, and we aren't, right? So I'm glad he's on later.
One of the best things about Shark Boy is that he was smart enough to copyright that name.
Yes.
Wow.
Well, you know, they came to the Pillman, the third Pillman show we did. The one, have you seen the Benoit Regal match from that show?
I probably have. Yeah, I would have thought so.
It's one of the greatest modern day wrestling matches you're ever going to see.
Right.
But
Okay.
anyway, the network that does Shark Week and everything, is that A&E or whatever? They came to the show to film him wrestling and everything. Yeah, yeah.
Wow.
But yeah, they're yeah. I'm so proud of those guys. I'll tell you another kid that was damn good with Ring of Honor was B.J. Whitmer.
Yeah.
B.J. the hell of a hand too. Yeah.
I think BJ is one of those people who vastly underrated. Not enough people talk about BJ Whitmer these days.
You know what? He's not extremely showy. He was
Right.
such an easy guy to work with for me, right, as a trainer. And but yeah, hell of a talent. Some of the guys, that never made it to any. Again, it's subjective business, right? It's not necessarily how good you are. It's what I see in you is more important than necessarily your actual talent. And yeah, several. My Matt Stryker should have, he had a would have had a developmental contract, and I had another kid, Ray Steele, who was developmental. Chad Collier, who started with Malenko's in Florida, and then when Dean went with WCW, Chad came home to Indiana and then came over to train with me. But yeah, we had when I had the WWE contract, I had a cruiserweight crew that I, to this day, believe could have gone on either SmackDown or the Raw roster and never missed a beat. I mean, Shark Boy, I mentioned Chad Collier, BJ was a cruiserweight at the time. Jamie Noble, Shannon Moore, Kaz Hayashi, Jimmy Yang, right? Lash LaRue, Kwee, Alan Funk, who was Kwee. I had a hell of a cruiserweight crew, but nobody appreciated them but me, I guess. But yeah, that was a great time, and all those guys were tremendous. They were. I had about 35 guys, and I'm not a big guy. If I never see another 3-way or 4-way match, I'll die peacefully. They're overdone, I think. But I had to have them because I had all these guys that needed the ring time. I mean, the guys that I trained, like BJ and Nigel and Stryker, et cetera, right? And plus the guys from WCW and the guys from the WWE camp in Memphis. So I had all this great talent, man. It couldn't have gone bad if it wanted to, I don't think.
Les, thank you so much for coming on today. We've spoken for, what's that, an hour and 13 minutes already. Thank you so much for coming on, spending the time with us. I think everybody that watches this video will agree that this has been one of the most informative and one of the best interviews that we've had on the channel, I'd say.
Well, thank you. And always, it's a pleasure. And we can figure out the technical difficulties.
Yeah.
Well, Benji, thank you for having me and letting me come to Wales for a visit.
Oh, welcome anytime.
But let's do it again sometime, shall we?
Oh, I'd love to. I could speak to you for hours and hours, Les. It's a good job you have a podcast.
We won't do that because I'm old and I need my rest.
I don't blame you.
I've enjoyed it and I'd love to do it with you again.
Oh, thank you very much. Les, we'll flick onto the end screen now. We'll say our goodbyes, but stay on the line and we'll do a proper goodbye after the show.
Okay, good.
There you go, guys. That was the Les Thatcher interview. Like I said, unbelievable guest today. We learned so much, and I think it's from a period that we don't speak about enough. Even on this channel, it's meant to be the retro wrestling room, but my knowledge only goes back so far without doing the research. So It's amazing to have these type of guests on. If you do like the video, please leave a like and subscribe. Leave a comment down below, and hopefully we will see you guys soon. Bye guys.